the case of Lacey Fletcher, who was allowed to rot away on the family sofa, and her parents knew and did nothing. Like, I just don't understand. I found today some pictures for the first time of before when she was at school and when she was just part of a normal family. This is her playing sports at school. It doesn't make any sense to me. How did this happen? I just don't understand. But I'm going to deep dive this case and tell you about it, because I even when this first was, it's absolutely. She was decomposing while she was alive, and she had the worst bed sores. She had so much going on, and they just kind of existed around her, like they couldn't see her. She became invisible in her own world. I've got a blurred out picture from the court. It's horrific. This was the sofa that she had melded into. She had melded into the sofa. She was tiny. Like, it's literally, they showed blurred out pictures in the court. I'm not even going to show you the blurred out picture with her remains on the sofa. This happened over a period of time that something should have been done. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to explain to you, because a lot of people, I think in the end it was almost like she was locked inside of her own body and she just couldn't. And they, as parents, they failed her incredibly. I can't imagine how you have a normal relationship with your child, you love your child, you look after your child, and then one day you just decide that they just don't exist to you anymore. I just don't get it. Thank you everyone for the popular. Thank you everyone for coming in the heart me's. Everyone, even if you haven't seen the heart me, if you're in here with us this evening, thank you. If it's your first time in here, thank you for giving our lives a chance. We are a true crime. I'm a haphazard ADHD-ridden person who tries to cover true crime. Some of you just missed my absolute amazing pronunciations of medical terms that were 94 letters long, and I'm sure all of you will live with that regret. So this case is a harrowing story about unimaginable neglect, and this is about the life of a woman with special needs who experienced profound isolation and suffering. Now, you've all heard the saying, right, how you can be in a crowded room and feel lonely. This case is almost like this was Lacey's life. This was Lacey's whole existence. Now, this case should be listened to with care, and I am going to put a trigger warning here because I can't cover a case without giving you the facts of the case. And this case is so hard to understand how this is possible or was allowed, how parents were the ones ignoring this. Can I just ask everyone, all I ask from you guys, I don't ask anyone to send a heart me gifts or any of those things, but if you could just repost the live to make Lacey's story accessible to more people. I'd like to make it so that everybody knows who she is. So if you could just repost the live before we get started, I'd be really, really eternally grateful for that. I didn't put 18 plus on as well, so I can't even vape. Thank you for the repost, guys. Okay, thank you everyone for the gifts as well. Thank you. I am eternally appreciative for the great gifts. You don't have to send them, but thank you so much. So when a 911 call came through shortly after the new year on January the 3rd of 2022, a couple reported to finding their daughter after a weekend away. So they said they come home to the house after a weekend away at 2568 was their address on Tom Drive, and they lived in a town weirdly called Slaughter in Louisiana. Now, they say their daughter has died on their sofa. They've come home, they've just found her that way, and they don't know what to do. It's a medical emergency, right? They're like, we were out of town, we were seeing friends, she's dead on the sofa. Now, the authorities respond to the home thinking it's an overdose. She's had a heart attack. They're thinking something has happened where, their healthy daughter, who's 36, has died on the sofa. What they would find in that home was unimaginable. The scene of a nightmare, something they would never be able to get over. They said they could never have anticipated the horror that they would see inside that home. As they walked through the door and found Lacey Fletcher melded into that sofa, it was immediately obvious that she had been there for an extensive length of time, and it was the worst case, they believe, in American history of neglect. Lacey Fletcher was born on November the 25th, 1985, an only child to her parents, Clay and Sheila Fletcher. She was described at school as vibrant, smart and fun, and she was somewhat immature for girls her age, and we know that now to be a learning difficulty. And she was she had a mental age of a lot lower than her actual age. So she was a typical girl. She loved music. She loved Mariah Carey and literally was always playing her music. And at 12 years of age, she was a member of a volleyball team. She spent time with her friends. She was a member of a private school, which was the Brownsville Baptist Academy in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. And from all appearances, she had a normal family and a normal life. Who's requesting my box? I don't know. Oh, shit. Sorry. I want to put a picture up of her family. So this was her family growing up. So this was her about 12 years of age. And it seems like a normal, everyday family, right? The Fletcher family of 3 lived in Slaughter in Louisiana, a small town with a population of about 1,000 people. Their home was situated on a 3.6 acre lot with plenty of privacy and an expansive, massive lawn. Her friends and classmates saw her as a fun, normal child who was one of the sweetest kids you could ever meet. Yeah, exactly, Chloe. It doesn't make any sense. Like, she had this nice house, this great parents, a private school education, was a member of a volleyball team, spent extensive time outside with her classmates and people in the neighbourhood. Then one day it just stopped. So Lacey transitioned to adolescence and she began to struggle with various issues that kind of hit her more in the teenage years. According to Clay, her father, their daughter was fine up until the point she was 14 and started 9th grade. And at this point, she developed a severe social anxiety disorder. She had Asperger's syndrome and an array of phobias that left her debilitated. She just couldn't do anything. Now, I find it very hard to believe that at 14 she developed Asperger's syndrome. That doesn't happen. I believe that as a child, it was easier for her parents to believe like this is just kind of growing pains, like she's going to grow into, you know, someone they consider maybe more productive or whatever, and they weren't accepting her for who she was. And at the point where she was 14 and teachers and friends, etc., started saying, you know, she's a bit different, they then took this to be like, oh my God, she's developed all these problems, when actually this was just who your daughter was. And at this point, most parents would then start reading into Asperger's syndrome, start reading into the, thank you, Alexander, you would start looking into how you could help, what help there is out there, understanding their condition. But they indicated that they kind of just accepted that she didn't fit in the world. And rather than like most parents who are like, you know, I expect the world to change to house my child comfortably, I don't want to change my child for the world, they tended to be like a bit embarrassed of the fact that she had all these phobias and fears and started to have these meltdowns. As time went on, Lacey became more isolated, and her friends and her classmates started to point out the fact that she didn't match their maturity level. While her peers were involved in activities and interests, Lacey gravitated towards things like Disney movies and princesses. And it felt like, to me, when I watched the trial, which you can watch parts of the trial on Court TV, it felt like her parents were kind of horrified that she was weird. And so they kind of decided to like hide her from the world, like, oh God, I don't want the neighbours to see her like this. And actually she just seemed like a really harmless kid. I don't see anything in Lacey's background that makes me think she was dangerous, unlovable, or anything other than just like a child whose superhero power was the fact that she had additional needs and she saw the world a little bit differently. When Lacey was about 15 years of age, Clay and Sheila took her to see a clinical psychologist at Baton Rouge, a Dr. Donald G. Hop. Here she was diagnosed with autism, a below average IQ and severe social anxiety. It was clear that Dr. Hop, that Sheila and Clay Fletcher were having a difficult time accepting that they had had a daughter with special needs. And I wonder why he didn't highlight this, as these parents seem to be almost rejecting their daughter based on the fact of her differences. It's almost like, well, she doesn't fit into our perfect picture family. We didn't really want one of these, and that kind of seems to be their attitude. Now, fearing their daughter was being bullied at school for differences, they withdrew her from school. Now, Lacey never complained about this. She never said that she'd been bullied. She did say she had some issues adapting to her friends kind of growing up, But she didn't say she'd been bullied or wanted to leave school. I think they were almost embarrassed of her, and they thought, well, if no one can see her, no one can complain. We know that going forward from 2000, the year 2000 to 2002, when Lacey was between 14 and 16, she had 12 sessions with this psychiatrist. We know that. So at this point, although they've withdrawn her from school, they are trying to get a medical intervention. After this point, Lacey began to fade away from public view. Neighbours of the Fletchers recall seeing her 1 minute exercising in the street, playing basketball and carrying like small hand weights and stuff. And they then said there was no more Lacey. They just didn't see her anymore. One neighbour says around the age of 21, so this would be some 5-6 years later, they did see Lacey in the backyard exercising a few times. But apart from this, the neighbours said in the court, they just began forgetting that the couple ever had a daughter. They just forgot that she existed. The whole town forgot that Lacey ever existed. New friends that met Sheila and Clay said they didn't even know they had a daughter. Family who had known them and been their family said we forgot they had a daughter, even though we gathered with them weekly. She never came and we forgot she existed. Do you know how sad that is, that you can exist in the world and people forget that you exist as a child? A woman called Jess Easterly, who actually gave evidence in court, said, I have known the Fletchers for 25 years. I spend every holiday with them at my house. I meet them weekly. I go for breakfast and coffee. They never mentioned this daughter. Didn't know. When neighbours Robert Blades asked about Lacey's whereabouts in 2017, assuming she got married and moved out, Clay explained that Lacey still lived at home and she was doing fine. But Robert said, but we haven't seen her. And her dad said, don't worry about it. In 2014, when Lacey was about 27 years of age, 9 years before she would be found dead on her parents' couch, her friends from high school received emails from her that sounded very much like Lacey. She seemed happy and sent them links of Disney videos and made no mention of any kind of anxiety, abuse, distress. We don't know still to this day if it was her. I have questions. In 2010, 8 years after Lacey first was seeing Dr. Hopp, the psychiatrist, Sheila and Clay went back to his office 8 years later without Lacey to seek his advice. They explained that Lacey refused to leave the living room and had been urinating and defecating on a towel they lay out for her on the floor. She never showered, pooed and weed on this towel, and they would bring her all of her meals on the couch. That baffles. How are you even accepting that at this time, after the age of, what, we're talking about 22, 23 here, that you're just laying a towel out for her like she's a cat, like a litter tray? And you're just like, cool. Although Dr. Hopp said to them that they need to hospitalise their daughter if it had got this severe, and that he believed that Lacey was showing signs of acute psychosis, they never heeded his advice. They never did any of those things. I don't know why he didn't chase it up either. I don't know why he didn't chase that up, because at that point you were the only medical person, the only person outside of that home that knew this girl had not left the sofa, that she was defecating and urinating on a towel, that she was eating her meals, that her life was confined to a sofa cushion, and he did nothing. Dr. Hobb explained that they could obtain a commitment order so Lacey could be taken from the house even if she refused to go, and they could get their daughter medical help, which meant that she would have a best chance of success, right, for the future and moving forward. And Dr. Hobb said this was the last time that I ever saw them. And just like everyone else, he forgot about Lacey. When Sheila dialed 911 at 2:27 a.m. on the morning of Monday the 3rd of January 2022, she said, my daughter's not breathing. We've come home. I've just finished doing Lucy Letby, The Crazy Three, and yesterday I did a massive live on Susie Lamplugh, Steve Wright, and about 10 girls from Ipswich and Norwich who have passed away, all UK based, all available on YouTube at Hayley_comment_crime. She went on to say that her daughter had been sick It was a long story, but her daughter was on the couch. They'd gone away for the weekend, and when they came back, she had stopped breathing. And that's all they explained it, right? She's just stopped breathing. They say, my daughter's 36, and it's just a long story, but she's dead on the couch, which is just such an under reach of what had happened. When emergency services arrived, they were accosted by a horrific odour. It was the overwhelming smell of urine, faeces and decomposition. Coroner Dr. Ewell Bickham III quickly responded to the tidy 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home with black shutters throughout. And he said the whole house, thank you Kirsty, was perfect, clean, nice, apart from one room, the one room she was confined to. He said he had seen every type of death there was in his 30 years as a coroner. But when he went inside, he said the smell was akin to a septic tank, as well as decomp. He said he never had experienced anything like this in his life, and he would never, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. That's always 10 sneezes at once, sorry. He said he'd never seen anything like it in his whole career. He first noted that Sheila and Clay standing in the kitchen, and Clay stood emotionless, and Sheila's head was positioned between her legs as she tried to make herself weep a little bit, and he thought it was all very staged. I mean, she's got her head between her legs and she's trying to make these noises that there's no tears. Recalling what he witnessed when he entered the living room, to the right, he saw the couch and he saw Lacey. And Dr. Bickham, who is a man who is a grandfather and a father, openly wept on the stand. He said he had never, ever seen anything like it. He said she was positioned in a worn hole that her body had worn away on the sofa. Her legs were crossed underneath her, and her body in total was about this long. And her mouth was wide open with a haunted expression frozen on her face. She was naked from the waist down with her shirt pulled up over her torso, revealing her breast. Her legs were crossed due to, I think it's called contractures, something that happens when the muscles, tendons and bones stiffen from ongoing immobility. She was in the position because she'd been in so much pain and had been trying to lift her body out of the hole, and she'd been unable to do this. The couch was absolutely saturated, thank you G, with urine and faeces that seeped through the door to the extent that the hardwood floor underneath the couch had become warped. This is the picture that was shown throughout the court case. Her body was in this hole here. Her whole body kind of was in the two sofa. Thank you, G. So thank you everyone for the gift. Was in the whole sofa, little hole there. And she was kind of melded into that hole. She had sores over her body that was so significant, like bed sores on a whole another level, because she'd been there for so many years. And her parents had just existed around it. Like, it didn't even matter. I'm going to take that picture off because I find it so upsetting. Despite his line of work, Dr. Bickham went on to say that he had never seen a human being literally tortured and allowed to die while she was still alive. He said she had been dead for years while alive. He said, like, I can't even tell you, like, the organs were gone. Her body couldn't even move in a normal way. We're going to talk about that at the end. She literally rotted in her own body, in a hole that was a sewer of a couch. Paramedics were haunted by the look on her face. She was skeletonized basically at this point, and her mouth was just open wide, her teeth were rotten. They tried to move her onto a stretcher, but she was fused to the couch. She was absolutely fused to the couch. Everyone involved was horrified. Her skin was coming off of her bones at this point, as she couldn't be moved. It was the worst case of neglect that any of the first responders had ever seen. Lacey had faeces in her hair, in her mouth, on her face and in her ears. There were open sores in her ears and extensive pressure injuries across her body that were infested with maggots. Since there was no sign she was in actual decomp at this point because she had just passed away, it was thought that the maggots were present prior to her death. they'd actually prolonged her life by consuming parts of her rotten flesh. And officials unintentionally caused post-mortem laceration to her body after they peeled her from the couch in order to place her into a body bag. She was 5'1". She weighed 96 pounds at the time of her death. The entirety of her backside of her body was submerged into depression in the couch, which was also filled with liquid shit and urine. She tested positive for COVID-19. She had kidney failure, a bone infection, otherwise known as osteomyelitis. She had sepsis, malnutrition, and it was eventually the sepsis along with malnutrition that had caused her death. Although her official time of death was documented as 3:07 on January the 3rd, Dr. Malcolm believes she died 48 hours before her mum even bothered to call 911. Her death was a direct cause of severe chronic neglect. Hey, Danny. In addition to her wounds, Dr. Malcolm saw that Lacey's hair was so infested with maggots and so matted to her skull. They had to use a scalpel to cut her hair from her head because it couldn't be brushed or even moved. And it was so dangerous with the level of maggot activity. She had spent the last 12 years melding to that couch, not moving, not being moved for bed sores, not being taken to the toilet, not being bathed. 12 years she had not moved for. She had laid there for so long that her tailbone had flattened from being in the same position for so long. Her fingernails and toenails were long and extremely dirty and had fecal matter, which is poo, if you don't know, underneath them. When her parents were interviewed, and they, by the way, the parents were well-dressed. They were well-dressed people. They lived in a lovely house. They had Christmas trees upstairs in the other living room, still from New Year. They'd been to a New Year's Eve party. That's why they were out of the house at that time. They had lived a normal, everyday life. They had nice food. Tanya, she had autism. She had anxiety. She had loads of things that, kind of were easily dealt with if her parents had just tried to get her help. It seems through the court case that her parents were so embarrassed upon being told that she had additional needs that they kind of withdrew her from society and allowed her to her life just to not matter anymore. She was 37 at the time of death. She'd been there for over 12 years. They just lived a normal life. Like, you know what I mean? She'd been there since they withdrew her from society about 14. And it just got sadder and sadder. Yeah, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, a place called Slaughter. Now, when the Fletchers were interviewed a little more than 2 weeks later after her body was found, Clay and Sheila told the police that her daughter had been intellectually and mentally normal, but that she had some degree of Asperger's. Asperger's syndrome is a form of the autism spectrum disorder, and it is a term sometimes used to describe the developmental disorder. However, the name has officially been changed since, and it no longer exists as Asperger's anymore. Those who have this type of ASD tend to struggle to relate to others socially and may have difficulty in understanding emotions, as well as having kind of different facial expressions in others. They may stick to a very specific routine and have a very narrow set of interests. Those who were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in the past would likely be diagnosed now with autism spectrum disorder. Now, as parents, I'm sure there are 764 people in here. I'm pretty sure that half of you have some kind of experience with autism, with ASD, that kind of thing, right? You know that at some point parenting is needed, right? I've spoke to so many parents whose children only want to eat one type of food, who don't want to go to school, who don't want to socialise, who it's such a challenge to get them to even go to the supermarket because they have to have, knowledge beforehand. This is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. But all of these parents absolutely go above and beyond every single day to make the world more accessible for their children. They do things every single day, despite the meltdowns. They manage to adapt to make the world seem more appealing to their children. They don't shut their children away like, oh no, the world is never going to get you. You've got additional needs. These parents 100% failed. At every single chance, they could have said, they could have worked harder, they could have made the world seem fun to Lacey at the age of 13 or 14, like we're going to do this, we're going to do that. They could have got charts, boards, they could have done anything they wanted. But instead, as soon as they were given a diagnosis for her, they were like, we'll take her out of school. Like, this is awkward, right? And they made it clear to the psychiatrist, like, we didn't want a child with special needs. We didn't ask for this. We just want the normal one, if that's okay. And that's not my words. I get all of you are in here like, what the fuck? But they kind of decided, like, this isn't perfect for me. So I'm going to just dip. And I'm going to leave her. And I'm not even going to try. Because she's not who we wanted her to be. And it's the same as, like, you know, that would be the same as, like, for me, say, as a parent, to be like, well, my daughter isn't doing well at school, so, you know, fuck it, I'm done here. Like, I wanted a perfect kid. I wanted perfect SAT scores. I wanted GCSEs. I wanted this. Like, they just kind of, like, they were the only people that were bullying her. They were the only people who were treating her different. They were the only people that were making her feel isolated. I don't even know to what point she didn't want to move. I don't even know how much anxiety she had. I don't know if it wasn't just her parents' anxiety that was put on her, because we'll never know her words now. We know up until that point, like I said, she was at school. She was going to a private school. She was a key member of the volleyball team. She was happy. She was talking. She was part of... She loved Mariah Carey. She loved boy bands. She had posters on her wall. She loved the Backstreet Boys. So we know that she was more than capable. But it seemed like they decided, oh God, like, this wasn't the child we want. We don't really want to put her out in public. Do you know what I mean? That's how it feels. That's how it kind of comes. So we know that Sheila claimed that her and Clay came back from a New Year's Eve trip on Sunday, January the 2nd, only hours before she placed that 911 call. She said at around 10 p.m. she made Lacey a sandwich and said she ate half a bag of Cheetos before Sheila fell asleep on the chair in the living room next to her daughter. Now, we know she wasn't alive to eat that sandwich, so that can't have happened. She said she woke up in the middle of the night and just thought, oh, Lacey's not breathing. However, it does not go, it goes against everything the coroner, Dr. Burkham III, has said. He said Lacey had already died 48 hours beforehand. How, as a mother, do you not notice the fecal matter in her mouth and her nails, the maggots throughout her hair, the sores on her body, the pain she would have been, and the smell, Pixie? The police said it was the worst thing they ever smelled. It was like a septic tank on top of decomposition and death. Like, you knew she was dying for the longest. I almost wonder if these parents were just waiting for her to die. That's how it feels to me. This is how evil and twisted it feels. Like, when she dies, we go back to being the perfect family again. We just need her to go. You left her there for 14 years on that sofa. 12 completely consistently. You were waiting for her to go. Like, that's how it is, right? You weren't in any way trying to get her care or get her help. You've been told years before to hospitalise her. If you can't, and I would always say that, right? I wouldn't say just to hospitalise children, but honestly, if you're at a stage as a parent where you can't cope to this extent, that you're going to torture your daughter to death, yeah, hospitalise her, phone police, do whatever you have to do. Do whatever you have to do. COVID was the least of their issues at this point. She was covered in maggots. Maggots from decomp were already on her body when she was still alive. She literally weighed nothing. Her bones were sticking out. She was down a hole in a sofa. She had poo and wee all over herself. She was rotting, and she had melded to the sofa. COVID was the least of their problems at this point. While she noticed her daughter had been of normal mind up until the day she passed away, she admitted she started eating less and less before her death. Now, notice how the parents are still like, no, she was normal. No, she had no emotional issues. No autism. Like, no, she was normal. Even after death, you couldn't let her just be Lacey. You couldn't just be like, actually, we were the problem. Lacey was actually just a really brilliant girl. She had autism, but also she loved music. She loved going out of the house. She loved exercising. She loved laughing. She loved Mariah Carey. You literally were so ashamed of her diagnosis, you murdered her over the period of years. Although Clay and Sheila admit they were aware of the extensive deep pressure injuries to their daughter's body, they said Lacey hadn't been to a doctor because she had never been sick. Sheila claimed that she had been routinely cleaning the wounds with a saline wash, antibiotic spray and zinc. Sorry. She also said Lacey would typically dress normally, despite the fact it was apparent that could not have happened. She could not have been dressing herself. For 12 long years, more than 4,000 days, Lacey had been on that couch, under the same roof as her parents, the two people who were supposed to take care of her. She had been slowly rotting to death. Sheila and Clay stood by, watching her suffer. She would have been screaming at sometimes due to the excruciating nature of her injuries. Is this the correct person? Yes. Scratch marks were noted on the arm of the couch. Scratch mark where she tried to save herself. There was a table that included things such as talcum powder, etc., but nowhere near where she would have been able to reach them or utilise those items. Apart from the unbearable stench and the horrific conditions Lacey was living in, as well as the fact she was embedded into the couch, the rest of the home was sterile. It was clean. 65-year-old Clay and Sheila were arrested after being indicted on the grand jury in May of 2022, and they were released on a £300,000 bond each. The judge dropped the indictment on a technicality, but they were re-indicted in July of 2023. According to the district attorney, Lacey had a mental disability that was progressively getting worse, and her parents had done nothing about it. Have I got their arrest pictures? Yeah, I do. This is them here. The neighbours kind of said they forgot. They forgot that she existed. It had been 10, 15 years. They asked the parents every now and again. They said nothing and they just forgot. They said they didn't take her to the doctors because Lacey refused to go, and Clay claimed, look, she was legally an adult. She made her own decisions. She chose to live that way. The house, I've only got the picture of the room she was found in. That picture is blurred because her body is on the couch in that picture. It's the only one I can find with the evidence photo, and you can see how small she would have been, right? Because that's all you can see. This is the couch after she was taken from it. I don't, calling yourself a parent, like, I can't. They may not know how to cope with it, it was said in the court. However, they did absolutely nothing to try and help their little girl, who, no matter how old your kids get, right, they're still your little girls, they're still your children, they're still, you would do anything to help them. Clay claimed that she was legally an adult and it was kind of her own decision if she medically wanted to go that way. Clay said that once in 2007, when Sheila had been out of town, Lacey managed to dress herself, which he believed proved that she had the mental capacity to get changed and do everything she needed to do. And he didn't have the right to choose for her otherwise, so if she wanted to stay on the couch, she could stay on the couch. The couple have been well-respected members of their community as well as their church, aren't they always? Sheila worked as a town alderman, while Clay worked as a nearby nuclear power plant. After Lacey's death, the community was so stunned to learn that they had a daughter at all, let alone one that had been left to rot on the sofa. They couldn't believe they hid such a sinister secret. Sheila and Clay claimed that their daughter never left the couch because she had agoraphobia, and that made her believe that anything outside of the perimeter of the couch was considered outside, and she was terrified, so they just let her. When Sheila testified, she argued that Lacey had never complained that she was any sort of pain, so she did not recognise the severity of her condition, and that would be impossible. The deaf face that she had that haunts all these investigators, with her mouth wide open and her sunken eyes looking like she had escaped from some kind of concentration camp, it would have been absolutely impossible for this little girl, well, this woman to be, I say little girl because she would have been tiny. She would have been absolutely in agony. It would have been impossible for her not to be. Clay made the statement, looking back, there are many things we wish we'd do differently. With hindsight being 2020, it's clear now, despite her resistance to assistance, our love for her was unwavering, and we never wanted her to die. There are various theories as to why Lacey hadn't moved herself from the couch for 12 long years. Now, one of the main things that was discussed in the court is that Lacey probably had locked-in syndrome. Now, locked-in syndrome is probably one of my worst nightmares. Locked-in syndrome is basically that you are trapped inside your own body, like you are mentally aware and you can like see and you can sense things, but you cannot move. It's like your whole body is paralysed, but you know it. And it's almost worse than not being aware. It basically happens, it's a neurological disorder that occurs when part of the brainstem is damaged, usually due to a stroke or some other medical emergency. Despite the fact the person cannot move any part of their body, with the exception of their eyes, they're still conscious and have full cognitive abilities. one of the reasons they say they can't rule this in is because actually Lacey's stomach was full of couch foam, which seems that she had been so hungry at times that she had been chewing the couch. And he believes if she had locked-in syndrome, she wouldn't have been able to chew. She wouldn't be able to use her mouth. The second theory, one that can't be ruled out, is that Lacey had been physically restrained to that couch during her teenage years to early 20s, which led to muscle atrophy, which made her gradually unable to move. The third theory is that mental struggles had been so debilitating and kind of made worse by her parents' incapability to even accept her, that she becomes so psychologically ill that she was unable to escape from her own prison. The final theory, and the one that Sheila and Clay claim to be accurate, is Lacey herself made the decision to remain there for 12 years, and I just don't understand that. It's one of those things the court have to prove, and they can't prove they're wrong. Whatever the reason, because Lacey had been suffering both mentally and physically, it had been Clay and Sheila's responsibility to do something about it. And we know this, right? As a parent, there are some parents who, my kid gets to 18, they get a full-time job, they want to move out, there's nothing I can do about it, right? And that's true, right? A lot of the time they become an adult. There is those parents that understand that always they'll probably have to care for their child, and they worry about when I'm not here, who will? They worry that obviously that their children don't kind of see the world in a way that is harmful, that people may not always be friendly towards them. There's other children who actually will need medical assistance, help to breathe, and all those things from parents. So you always gauge as a parent, like, based on child to child, like, this child will always be able to just fly by themselves, and this child here will always need their mum. They'll need some kind of care. And it seems like they decided, you would, wouldn't you, Kirsty? You would literally go to every place. And if, God forbid, we ever decide that we aren't enough, or we don't, we're not equipped to deal with the situation, we would never just be like, oh, we'll just leave you over there. You'd be phoning hospitals, you'd be getting her admitted, you'd be seeing specialists, you'd be doing whatever you could, which I'm sure most parents in here, all of you pretty much, have had to do that at some point. There was also a question about how Clay and Sheila lived with the absolute unbearable smell in their home, how no one else smelled the stench in their clothing, their skin, their hair. Had they never had a single visitor in the 12 years? During sentencing, both Clay... Oh, not my pen pot. I thought I was going to have to pick that up. 52 pen pick up. I saved it. Barely. Sorry, I'm so jumpy today. So... I'll go back to my part now because I closed my phone at the same time. During sentencing, both Clay and Sheila pleaded no contest to manslaughter, meaning they weren't admitting to guilt but accepting the punishment, which waived their right to a trial. Regardless, the prosecution presented hours and hours of heartbreaking testimony. A psychologist who interviewed Clay and Sheila determined they were not suffering from any mental issues, many mental health issues that would have caused them to neglect their daughter. It's the case of Lacey Fletcher. The psychologist did indicate that their ignorance may have stemmed from what is known as caregiver superiority complex, which allows people to believe they know better than even professionals. I don't see that here. They absolutely didn't have visitors because they were embarrassed of their daughter. They couldn't understand that she wasn't perfect. They were paying for a private school. She was supposed to be this all-American girl. And as soon as they heard ASD, as soon as they heard that she may have learning difficulties, they decided to be so embarrassed that they took her away from the world, and they probably made her feel horrific. On March the 20th of 2024, Sheila and Clay were each sentenced to 40 years in prison, with 20 of those years suspended, however, with their ages. District Judge Betsy Jones went on to say, "We can argue about whether or not the process took 3 months, 6 months or 3 years. I don't really care. This was a tragedy. The truth is that Lacey laid on that couch and slowly died because you didn't allow her any medical help, any love, any healthcare. You weren't parents to her." Outside the courtroom, Sheila's attorney, Steve Moore, made a long statement defending his client. Although he admitted that both she and Clay were negligent, he argued they loved her to death. He claimed they cared for their daughter on a daily basis and that Sheila come home from lunch every day to care for and eat lunch with their daughter. Why does she have couch foam in her stomach then? According to Dr. Patrice Berry, a psychologist who had treated adults with autism, although families may face barriers caring for adults with neurodevelopmental conditions, resources exist to help, including patient facilities and family support groups, something Dr. Hopp recommended. However, the family chose not to do those. Dr. Berry feels that Lacey did not appear to have the mental capacity to refuse care, so Clay and Sheila should have filed for medical intervention on her help. District Attorney Sam Dr. Aquila views Clay and Sheila as cold and calculated and noticed they shifted the blame onto Lacey all throughout the court case, and just didn't seem to care that she really needed help. While Sheila is serving her sentence at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, Clay is imprisoned at the Elan Hunt Correctional Centre. Lacey's harrowing story is more than a tragedy. It's a wake-up call for awareness, compassion, action and safeguarding. Her case didn't entail a single violent act, but rather years and years of inaction. Day after day, year after year, the neglect continued until it became fatal. The suffering or lack of dignity that Lacey experienced during the 12 years she spent on the couch in the centre of her parents' living room is one that is impossible to imagine. She was in pain. She had bed sores. She was riddled with maggots. Her body had already started rotting. She was in liver failure. She was unable to go toilet, wash or bath. And I believe this all started way back years before, back when she was 14 and 15, and the parents decided to lay a towel on the floor for her to go toilet on, like she was an animal. At that point, they almost instilled in her, after we were told you're not perfect, you're not going to use our bathroom, you're going to go on this towel. And eventually she started to not love herself as much as they didn't love her, and she just gave up on herself until she couldn't make the decision to move off that sofa. All the while you just carried on going to church and living this normal life. And it's almost like you came home every day and hoped that she'd died. So you could just, yes, on the sofa be for 12 years. You know, she was there for years and years. She was there non-stop for the last 12 that we know of. This case this is a case of not even action of physically causing this pain. This is of inaction, of deciding to do nothing. Now, parenting is a verb, right? It's a doing word. It's you parent someone, you're parenting, and they just did nothing. And that is one of the greatest crimes of all. You took her out of society where she was a fully fledged member of society on sports teams. She mattered. And as soon as you had a diagnosis that she had learning difficulties and Asperger's back then, went on to be autism, you decided that you were embarrassed and you took her away from everything, and you told her daily that she would never be anything because of those things, and you eventually stripped her of everything until she was found melded to the couch, half down a hole, with her face screaming in agony, covered in maggots. And then you dared to say, well, she was an adult. If she wanted to do something, she could have. You absolutely failed in every aspect. To me, this is worse than cases sometimes of physically hurting a child. Like this lack of doing nothing, knowing she couldn't help herself until the police arrive and have to physically peel her off of a couch in a home where you lived in perfect rooms. Worse, but Kelly, 100%. You lived in perfect rooms that were neat, and she lived in this one room that smelled like a septic tank, where her body had already started to decompose while she was still alive. It was already producing maggots. It's a horrific, horrific story. I just can't even imagine how this happens. How, as a parent, you walk past it every single day, you see the suffering, and you don't do nothing. You do nothing. That doctor told you back when she was 16, she needs to be hospitalised. I think she's in psychosis. I don't think this death took years.